Hello. I'm glad that we could finally do this at a time that isn't in the middle of the night for any people in Europe who are watching. So let's get started. So I was originally thinking we would continue working on associations, but one of the big things I've been wanting to accomplish overall is reducing our dependence on syntax extensions. Not necessarily because I don't like the use of syntax extensions, but because they're unstable. I want to continue to have them on nightly, but on stable Rust right now you have to use syntax to do certain things. I try to keep everything that our compiler plugins do for you semi-reasonable if you're not using compiler plugins, but specifically insertable into and change set for are just ugly if you write them yourselves. And the issue with syntax is Diesel doesn't rely on too much of lib syntax that breaks. We had a breaking change happen at the beginning of the month, and it looks like we might be affected by the upcoming batch of changes as well. But before that, there were good 2-3 months that various breaking changes occurred that Diesel just wasn't affected by. But with syntax, we are effectively depending on we're effectively depending on every part of the library, because if Serde, for example, which tends to end up getting broken a lot more frequently, gets affected, they're going to bump their syntax version with a hard dependency. And that means that until Diesel goes and releases another version of CodeGen, even if it's just bumping that constraint, it requires us to basically roll a new release every time anything changes in lib syntax. The locks, I don't know if I'm going to make to... I'm assuming PT is Portugal. I would like to, but I have not made any decisions about going yet. I had fun last year there, though. So, pre 0.1, we used to have a slightly different CodeGen story. Before the Diesel CodeGen crate even existed, I had a bunch of regular macros. And the way that a lot of the custom drive stuff worked was you just copy-pasted your struct definition into like 5 macros. I'm not sure if insertable into ever did. Anyway, I would like to look at maybe going a little bit closer to that. I'm not sure if it'll be able to do 100% of what CodeGen does. Certainly in first schema will always require CodeGen. Part of the reason why I was fine with eventually just moving over to CodeGen as the main way to do this was because since infer schema exists and that requires connecting to the database at compile time, I knew we were always going to eventually want a true procedural macro. So I don't know if we can actually drop syntax though for everything other than infer schema. It would be cool if we could, but if we can get like 95% of the way there, I would really like to have a useful story for people who are not wanting to use syntax and are not using nightly. One of the other reasons that this is important is if you go look in our macros crate, or in our macros module, you'll notice that we have to fully qualify certain things. There are some macros that get invoked in places where we can't, I don't know what the right word is, we can't just put use there because we don't know what's already been imported and we're not necessarily in an isolated namespace. But when you're doing a macro, you have this magic $ crate variable, and that is the name of the current crate, including if it's been aliased. So if you did extern crate Diesel as something else, this would still work. But we can't actually do that from within CodeGen. So you notice here, right, we have to do the same thing. We are we're fully qualifying a lot of these, but we always have to call it diesel. So if you did extern create diesel as something else, this would just break. So one of the other reasons I want to do this is I want to have code gen actually just, if it needs to do anything procedurally, I want to have it continue to do that, but then call a macro from within diesel itself to generate the final code and just pass in all of the information that's required. Because it'll just be a little bit more resilient there. So I was originally looking at doing this and decided to hold off on it because there is no lifetime matcher for macros, and we need to deal with lifetimes when we generate some of these trait implementations. And so I was going to hold off. I've got a pull request open to the Rust compiler right now to add that, and then also an RFC to justify the pull request. But it's pointed out during discussion of the RFC that actually you can match against lifetimes with the token tree matcher. So I want to see if maybe we can just get there even without the ability to specifically match against lifetimes. So I'd like to do, first let's just start by, let's go ahead and start with this one, this new users we're calling insertable into. So let's just delete this. Well, we need to leave it there. What we'll do to start is we will look at the code that CodeGen, the actual code generated by CodeGen, paste that in here and macroize it. So to do that, we're going to need to do cargo rust C, and since this crate only has tests, and you can't do cargo rust C with the test flag, at least not for what I want to try and do, we'll have to quickly, just temporarily, lie, whoops, and tell it that we are actually a normal library. Let me check out onto another branch too. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go into, let's do it over here so I can pipe it into more. So we're going to go into diesel tests. And then we're going to set database URL to something for SQLite because that'll compile slightly faster. And then we'll do Rust. Then we're going to do Z unstable options, which will let us then do pretty equals expanded. And so what that's just going to do is it's going to run through macro expansion and then show you the resulting code, running it through a pretty printer, which actually isn't terribly pretty, but will serve our purposes just fine. And I need to pipe that into more. By the way, if anybody just has general questions about Diesel, I know there's been a little bit of chatter with the whole faster than a SQL string tweet, and presumably there are some people watching who didn't watch the stream where we implement it. If you just have any general questions about Diesel, feel free to ask, and I'm happy to answer them. It doesn't have to be about what we're specifically working on. I'm still trying to get used to like checking chat frequently and checking my video preview frequently to make sure I haven't left the documentation for standard any open for 10 minutes. Because I'm just doing this from my regular laptop, so I don't have multiple screens. I might once I'm finished moving next week, or I guess I'll be finished moving in like a month. I might get a more refined streaming setup. All right, so here we've got all of the code generated. So we're gonna go look for a new user, and this is the insertable implementation. So we'll just take this here, And I believe this was the line where it ended. Doesn't quite fit on one screen because of how it formats it. Whoops, and I grabbed way too much stuff there. That looks roughly correct here. So let's talk about what insertable actually is. So when we look at insert statement here, let's look at how everything actually gets built when we call insert. So that's going to be query builder, functions. So all inserts is going to do, it takes anything. We did recently change it to the signature slightly, where this used to just look like this. Because insertable over here, as you can see, gets implemented for the reference, and so like this code shouldn't need to care. But the error message, if you accidentally tried to pass an owned value, came at a place where it was really not terribly helpful. So we changed the signature here to kind of give you a better error message earlier if you make what turned out to be a pretty common mistake. And I can talk about in a minute why we implement this on a reference instead of on the trait directly. So that creates an incomplete insert statement, which you literally can't do anything with other than call into on it. And that creates this insert statement. So there are two things that we need to be able to get when we're trying to insert something into the database. I don't know how to pronounce your name, MRLQD. The thing that we're going to work on first is see if it's possible to turn one of our annotations from CodeGen into just a normal non-procedural macro on stable, and then we'll probably work some more on associations, or maybe there is some more stuff to work on for SQLite upsert as well. So there are two things that we need when we are constructing an insert statement, or three really. And you can actually see this in the implementation of toSQL here. So we need to know the from clause, or more specifically, this is called from clause. It's not going to be the from clause because we have this constraint called that it's a single table, so that's actually just going to be the table name. But you know, code reuse and all that. We need to know the names of the columns that we are inserting into, and then we need to know the various values. Now, what happens here actually changes slightly. Will change slightly depending on if you are on SQLite or on Postgres. Postgres and MySQL, and I think everything that isn't SQLite supports the keyword default in place of any individual column. So what we do is we always pass the full set of column names, and then for values that we don't want to insert, we put the default keyword there instead. But we can't do that for SQLite. So instead, for SQLite, column names is going to change based on the values that are there or not, and then we will only pass the values for the columns that we actually wanted to insert. And as a side effect of that, that means that we can't do batch inserts on SQLite. So on Postgres, you can pass in a single struct, or you can pass in a slice or a vector. And if you pass in a slice or a vector, we'll just do one query to insert all of them. On SQLite, we can't do that because we don't know that the columns that are going to be inserted are the same for all of those. We might be able to maybe have a weird funky implementation where if we know the struct doesn't contain any options, then we allow it on SQLite, but it's tricky and just turned out not to be worth it because there's also just not really any round trip time for SQLite. Batch insert's very important on Postgres because there's an inherent cost with going to and from the database. Even if it's on localhost, it thinks it's going over the network, so there's still that cost there. But SQLite doesn't have any network protocol. It was not designed. It was designed to be accessed locally from C, either in memory or via a file on the local system. So there's no actual round trip cost there, at least if you're in a transaction. Which means that it wouldn't be writing the inserts to disk. And presumably, if you're inserting more than one thing, you'll be inside of a transaction. So the trait that comes out of that is called insertable. And insertable has one function called values, and that returns this thing of type insert values. And insert values basically mirrors the query fragment, which is our general AST builder to SQL trait, and it mirrors the two most important methods from it here. It skips the function for checking if it's safe to cache the prepared statement because we never cache insert statements, and then it just has an additional method to get the column names. And so this is why we actually implement it for a reference. We don't want to take ownership. We want you to be able to reuse the values that you pass in. Our query builder generally doesn't take ownership of anything. But we can't just take a reference to self here because this values type would need to be, right, we would probably do we would have to do something like this. But we're not returning a reference to our values. If you look here, it's a little funky. So let me write out like a simplified form. So if we did like impl db I'm just going to skip where clauses, right? So if we had type values, let's just ignore that this needs to be AST nodes, right? And we're just going to say if we want to return each of our fields, because effectively what we want to do is we want to return a tuple of each of our fields, and then we do some additional conversions so that Diesel knows how to deal with them, right? So that would be, in this case, string and option string. So if we had the values function be like this, right? If we took a reference to self, we wanted to return a reference to our values type. We can't actually do that because this tuple wouldn't be owned anywhere because we're just creating it ad hoc in this function. And then we also wouldn't be able to put anything inside of it because the tuple wants to own its values, and we can't move out of a borrow to self. So that means what we actually need is for the values type to be like this, so that we can do this. But to do that, we need to basically be able to refer to this lifetime here at the trait level. I kind of wish that there was a magic like self lifetime, and it looks like that used to be a thing in Rust. Just when I was working on the accepting lifetimes in macros patch on the Rust compiler, I noticed some references to this, which I've never seen and was presumably taken out long before I started. But this would be a really useful thing because that would mean this code could just be a lot simpler. But because we can't do that, we instead have to be able to reference that lifetime. So I call it insert because that's unlikely to conflict with anything that you're going to have. Right. And so once we implement it for that and we have values take ownership of self, now we are able to reference this lifetime like so. So that's why we do that. All right, so now that we've done all of that explanation. Oh, fun fact, if you pipe compiler output to more and then close more, it panics. So now we can delete this. Actually, we'll delete it for now. So our integration tests for SQLite should still work just fine. Other than the fact that I changed stuff that I shouldn't have. Hello, Simon Stricchio. Thanks for tuning in. So I'm just going to make sure that still compiles, and then we'll start macroizing it. So since this is just an annotation, basically the only information that we have when we're doing our procedural macro stuff from an annotation is the literal token tree of the struct definition and the arguments passed to our annotation, because in this case it wasn't derive. Like, this is effectively derive insertable, but we had additional information we needed. So we have the arguments to the annotation, and then we also are able to look at any other annotations on the struct. I don't think insertable into looks at any of the other annotations. Probably does look for annotations on the columns, but I don't know if we actually support that for insertable right now. Okay, cool. So that still all worked. So we'll call this like insertable. Actually, let's just call it insertable into. Actually feels weird when it's not an annotation on the struct itself. So maybe let's just call it impl insertable. So we basically need the struct definition and the we basically just need the struct definition and the table name that we're inserting into. So let's have it match struct name, which will be an ident. And then we'll just say into, and then we'll have it take the table name. Whoops, and we need more than that. We need, and then we'll iterate over each of the fields. So that'll be field name, which will be an ident, a colon, and then field type, which will be a tie. And we will enforce that has at least one field. And then I should probably also have one that looks like this. Because what I've tended to do in these macros, if you've tried using the table macro directly and you're not a huge trailing comma fan like I am, you'll notice that the table macro enforces that you use a trailing comma. And I've just done that in this macro definition as well. Yeah, anyway. Hello, J-Ro. I haven't talked to you in like months. How are you doing? It took me a minute to parse the name there. It's still early for me. All right, so we should be able to just put this entire body into here. And then I'm gonna go through and sort of clean this up a little bit. Because when you just take the raw full expanded output from the Rust compiler, it can be pretty ugly, especially when we're fully qualifying everything. Let me struct name. And then I tend to put the word where up on the same line as the type that we're implementing it for, so that way I can indent all of the elements of the where clause by one and wouldn't have to change the indentation if I wanted to remove the first one. Most of Diesel's style choices are all built to reduce git churn. So there's two things that we put in our where clause. The first is that the backend is in fact a backend. And the second is this type, which is going to be identical to what's in type values, is we need to say that it implements insert values. So we're quite literally in the where clause. We're just repeating. We since the table is a concrete known type, we don't need to say this. But we're basically then saying like this part of the constraint of the trait itself, and then this part of the constraint of the trait itself. Now I actually have some helper types in Diesel that make referencing this type much prettier. But there is a bug in Rust with the interaction between lifetimes when I use those helpers. So I'll demonstrate it because since new user doesn't owns everything inside of it, we won't see the bug. But when we use this for an additional struct later on, we will see the bug. So here we're going to say where column insert value, where the first field is the column that's being inserted into, so that's going to be table name, field name. And then the second is Diesel expression helper types as expr. So as expr is a little thing that we use a lot internally. The first argument is basically the concrete type. So this is going to be a reference with the lifetime of insert of the type of the field. And the second argument is the thing that we're trying to convert it into. So most of the methods that deal with expressions in our AST builder all use this trait called asExpression, and asExpression takes the SQL type that we're trying to convert it into an expression of as the argument. So that's why you see this user's name as expression SQL type here. That's just getting the SQL type, and then because this is a actual Rust value, that's going to go in through a bind param. So that bound there is what the implementation of asExpression would have returned. So that's just inline there, and this needs to repeat. Oh, I do have a typo insertable. Thank you for pointing that out. And yeah, for those of you who this is your some of your earlier exposure to Rust, don't worry, you don't ever need to deal with this sort of stuff. This is because we're writing extremely generic code, and I'm sorry that we're jumping right into some of Diesel's scarier code gen systems. So this values type is just going to be the same as the type in our where clause. That is not how I wanted you to format that. And then we just replace that with semicolon. I'm just looking at that where clause. I'm like, I feel like something got indented by 3 spaces. Anyway, once we get into this values function, finally, we are now in a context where we can actually import some stuff, which is nice. So, so what we're doing here, we have an enum called column insert value, and that represents whether we want to actually give it an expression or whether we want to use the default keyword on backends that support it. So we're going to return a tuple of all of our fields wrapped in this column insert value. But what we do in CodeGen is we go look at the type, and if it's a tuple type, we generate a slightly different expression. And if it, or not tuple type, if it's an option type, we generate a slightly different expression. If it's not an option type, then we just generate the else clause, basically. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to create a second macro, and we'll call it column insert expression. We'll just pass it the table name. Do we need the table name independently, or do we just need the... Yeah, it's fine. We'll pass it the table name, the field name, and the field type. And we're going to have 2 cases here. The first is where we look for the actual token option. And the second is where we just take any type. So this is what's going to happen on this case. I'm going to go ahead and import column insert value there. So this is going to be table name, field name. For whatever reason, we can't use like the method form of calling as expression here because it just doesn't infer what we want the SQL type to be. So we have to be a little more verbose, unfortunately. We're gonna have to just because of how macro hygiene works, we're gonna have to pass self in because we're not actually allowed to reference self. I'm calling the variable this because you can't have a macro variable called self because that is a keyword. So that's that case, and then in this case, we're going to generate we're just going to invoke the non-option form in the else clause here. All right, let's see how badly we messed that up. Oh, I still have hair color there. And we need to invoke our macro because we never did that. And so I'm kind of intending for the final thing to be here is like, basically you copy paste the actual struct definition. So it'd be like, I don't know, diesel magic struct something. Right, and you just actually put your struct definition in there instead, and then you can say stuff like that, probably with that, so I can match it as a token tree. I might even actually just be able to parse the meta item. I don't know. And then it'll just call all these other macros based on those meta items. Anyway, so but for now we'll actually copy paste it, and the struct definition will just be there more than once. We get rid of the pub keywords. We get rid of the struct keyword. In theory, I could just leave that there, but since we actually need to put some other stuff that makes it not a valid struct definition, we'll do that. Expected type found, comma. And you're right, that line wasn't indented one line too far, which means this line is probably, whoops. Also, that looks better. Still expected type. On 87 this time. Oh, I probably made the same mistake. Yes, and that is why that is indented wrong. And explains why maybe it was picking that up wrong. And then we forgot to pass self. And insertable takes the table, which we should probably actually not hardcode users there. And then we need to pass the table here as well. That's interesting. Why? Why would it want to know that it supports default keyword? That's only for slices. Oh, this should not be insert. This should be insert values, which is why it doesn't take the table name. And that's presumably I've got an implementation that has something to do with tuples somewhere that requires supports default keyword. All right, we just wanted to know it compiled. If it got to the point where it's emitting dead code warnings, then it compiled. So if we did this right, then we should be able to take this and also write then that should compile as well. And this time actually I'm going to run the test to make sure I didn't accidentally reference like the wrong table somewhere. Well, that will fail to compile if it referenced the wrong table, but I still also just want to see the test pass. Yeah, that is off. You know what I'm just going to do? I'm going to have Vim indent this whole thing, and then I'll fix it up how I like to have things indented. Because there we go. Okay, now I know everything's indented properly. When you're dealing with expanding macro sequences, the auto indenter for Rust in Vim tends to blow up. All right, so we've messed something up here. We've messed up our insert with defaults test. So that's operating on users. That means that it is actually trying to insert null. let's do this. Let's look at the code it generated again and make sure that we did properly hit that option case. Nope. So you can see here we no longer have that if statement. So that means that the macro expansion is not working here. So let me, I'm gonna go back to this just so we can focus on new user for a minute. I'm just gonna comment this out and see if it even matches for our you know what? I do this correctly and it tries to run the integration tests. Bad at computers today. Okay, so if we eliminate our type case, or our any type case, it works. Right, because in theory these should both match. But I thought if I had this one first, it would be more specific. Maybe if I make it last? Cuxy, are you referring to like something in the standard library? Because there's no non-procedural custom derive. Like I am aware of the ability to do that, you know, with. Can you send me a link to that? And does it work on stable? Because the whole point of this is to eliminate syntax. So swapping those around still isn't making it match. So I'm gonna go ahead and change this to like ident. Which is problematic because that means that that won't work with something like option cow, but string is totally a valid ident. Oh wait, am I misreading that? Was it failing in the macro itself and not in the usage of it? let's try this. Let's inline this here. Now let's see what it does. Now it should fail with like we're calling is none. Oh, right. It's failing because of the passing in string. All right, you know what? Let's do this. All right, I'm missing something really obvious and dumb. So why does this not work if I make it ident? Because string is totally a valid ident. It's failing on 94, so that's where we would expect it to. What's the, is it like debug macros? There's a debugging option in Rust C that has it print out every macro expansion. Trace macros, that's what it is. Huh. I wonder why we're getting, oh, right, name is, of course, name is first. Oh. No. That couldn't be it. That couldn't be it. I'm positive I have done this before, where I was able to match on specifically like a find crate for quick check. Oh, right. I mean, that's fine. We expect it to not. That's why I can't leave this here normally, because we don't expect it to. I mean, I could just move this to regular dependencies, and that would work. The thing that's annoying here is that I'm pretty sure it's matching this option case. No, let's do this. What if I take this code here and I inline it? What happens then? Does it still match? No. Trying to think if last time I did this, if I like matched on the type as something other than tie here. If I did something like path, maybe. Oops. Yeah, Cux, that's basically what I'm trying to do here. I just know this has worked in the past. Could always do this. That doesn't help at all, but that should match, right? Huh. Okay, so the tokens there are definitely different. It's splitting out the less than and greater than. Can we match field type with a token tree? So I definitely can't do this. Yeah. It's more than one token. It's 4 tokens. Let's see, that is valid as tie, path. What else is that valid as? It's just tie and path. It doesn't work as path either. I'm starting to wonder, actually, now that I think about it, because I was in the middle of a spike last time I tried this. And maybe I never actually got to the point where I had running tests and I wasn't able to match on the specific type like this. Well, that's annoying. So I need a way to treat options different as things that aren't options. Tabarja, this is all macro constructs. Ident is short for identifier and tie is type. All right, so maybe we can't actually do this with regular macro rules, because I don't know of a way. Coxie, yes, option T is the only case that needs to be matched on here. I'm also just gonna start typing on stuff where like I'm actively looking for responses because of the stream delay. All right, I'll give you 20 minutes. Okay, well, I guess we'll put that on hold. This on hold then. I'm still gonna commit it just in case we want to come back to it later. But for now, I think we will move on. Coxie, feel free to ping me though if you if you come up with a way to deal with that with regular macro rules. So in the last stream, I'm actually gonna refill my water before we jump into the next feature. So I'm gonna pause and we will be back in 5. All right. Well, that was a disappointing ending to that. Just gonna run the test over there while we get started with it. So, in the last stream, we introduced the ability to eager load a one-to-many association by adding this. Where is it? This grouped by method onto vectors of things that have the association defined. What I'd like to do is add an additional helper for the for the common case of you don't want to apply any additional query methods to the children other than just where they belong to all the parents. So something like this. And this test will actually probably get pulled out of this integration test suite and moved into a doc example at some point. So right now, if we wanted to get all of the posts that belong to a user, and then we need to load those. Right, so it looks something like that. And this would be posts, actually. And I'm not even going to write the assertion right now. Because, well, this is the assertion that you end up having to write, which you go load, right? Because we know if we load the post belonging to each of the users individually, that works. So I want to do, though, for this case, is simplify this to something like, because there's a few things that bother me. There's actually multiple solutions to some of the things that bother me. The first is that we're having to reference post twice. And that's because this belonging to method, like, it's on the struct just because that was the most convenient place to annotate. But that doesn't change how our query builder works. And if you're not familiar with diesel, the way our query builder works is it focuses on the query. And then when you call this load method, then you tell us what type of data structure you'd like to load it into. And we just enforce that the shape matches. But the query builder is focused on queries, not data models. Now, that actually probably could just be solved by putting this method on the table. And I feel like we might end up doing anyway, because this is just more consistent with how diesel works. That's the first thing that bothers me. The second thing is the overwhelmingly common case when you're loading records associated with a parent is that you just want the records associated with the parent. I still want to leave this. This is not grouped by; it's grouped by. We should also give this a less generic name. Maybe we don't need to. Anyway, I still want to give the option of doing these separate steps because, like, the overwhelmingly common case isn't the 100% case, and I think this is still a pleasant API if you ever do need to drop down to it. If you want to do something like this, right? And so that's all fine, but I would still like to give something a little bit more concise for the common case. So I'd like to look something like this. In fact, I think let's just do that. So we're gonna do impl parent child connection. Maybe we don't need connection here. We don't even need child here. And actually, I am going to put connection on the trait. We will move this around later. For now, I'm just going to take the connection as a parameter of the function. We need to take this somewhere, and we're going to have some where clauses that reference it as well. But we can set this up so that you don't need that underscore there. And this method should always end up getting called in a context where type inference can handle it. Anyway, so we're going to take self, and we're going to take the connection. And we're going to return a query result of vec of child, where so we're going to need everything that's in this where clause. I'm going to remove that. Anything that's a constraint on parent, I'm just going to put up here. We're also going to need belonging to DSL for a vec of parent, or for just self. I'm going to try and reference self whenever I can in case we change this to like into iterator or deref slice or something like that, if we decide to try and make it something other than vec. The reason that a lot of this is dealing with vecs specifically and not... Oh, hold on. I'm gonna pull up this... Let me... Hold on. Try and get this so I can put it on stream, because somebody has come back with a potential solution to the... You know what, we'll look at that after, since we've already started doing this. I will take a look at the thing for dealing with the field types, though, because this is actually going to be a relatively short feature. The reason that we're dealing with vecs here generally instead of like some sort of just box iterator or something that hides or something that doesn't necessarily allocate in this specific way is we need to allocate in order to do all of the grouping. And so if we're going to have intermediate vectors to do that to begin with, we may as well just give you back those vectors. And then if you want to turn it into something else, you can. But we're making the cost of, like, we need this to allocate. We're making that explicit. So the other thing that we're going to need to know is that child is queryable. And queryable is generic over the SQL type. Okay, this is going to get long. I'm just going to put SQL type there to start. Actually, I'm just going to put SQL type. No, I can't put SQL type there. And then con backend. And we need to know that con is a connection. And I really hope we don't also have to say has SQL type, because that will get ugly. And then the SQL type of all of this, if we look at belonging to DSL, output needs to be as query, so it's going to be A SQL type is child as belonging to DSL self output as query SQL type. And the reason we're having to specify this as query is because even though it knows that it is an as query and it should be able to, from all this, infer like there's only one thing that has a SQL type associated type, or an associated type called SQL type. Rust just forces you to disambiguate anytime it's : : : :::. So we have to write that. I think that should be everything. And this is literally just like child belonging to and I guess we'll probably need the maybe we won't. Let's see what happens. Oh, sorry. I will no, I'm just gonna move over here since we're not using that side. I assume that more general. Actually, I'm just gonna switch those. Yeah, because more generally, I tend to either work in the middle of the file or have it be. There we go. I can also move it up back to that. What was I doing? I was going to try and compile. Oh, and it failed. Because I need to import a lot of stuff. Actually, most of this is in prelude, so I'm just going to do that and see what's left. Probably query result. As query, okay. Oh, and I can't do an inherent impl. Okay, so we'll do impl, we'll do trait, load associated. I think we'll do it like this, and connection has to be, we can move some of this up here. No, we don't, there's no reason for us to put anything there. Child, though, will be down there. Parent. And then it also wanted me to import as query. I have to specify it as the SQL type. Oh man, okay. I'm gonna need to move some stuff around just to make this where clause better because, like, this is actually not such a horrible. Like, it looks verbose because we have to jump through a few uh, unambiguous trait syntaxes, but it's actually not too bad. I almost want to. Where's the has SQL type constraint coming from? Can I just move it? Oh, it's coming from queryable. No, it does need to remain on queryable. Crap. Okay. This is to say stuff like you can't load a. This is to say stuff like that you can't load an array column into a. I'm just gonna try removing that. I've got compile fail test for this. I'm gonna see if just removing that constraint causes a compile test to fail. And I can comment this out for now so I can run the compiler tests, even if that trait isn't ready yet. If you haven't looked at Diesel's test suite before, we have a pretty extensive set of tests to say that incorrect queries should fail to compile, and I've been trying to add more from SQL row. I've been trying to add more tests lately that also say, like, and the error message is helpful, because there have been some cases where the error message is, whoops, that was the wrong trait. Like, in theory, right, there's nothing there. I really wish, and this is something that's been discussed and may change in the future because they recently did it with lifetimes. But I really wish that when you state constraints about type parameters on a trait bound, that you didn't have to restate those every time you want to use that that trait. And there's good reasons why they have to do that, or why they do that, but. Like, one of the things I wanted to do is we have the trait backend, which is where this has SQL type trait gets added. Has SQL type used to actually just be called native SQL type, and instead of it being backend has SQL type, it would be type is a native SQL type for that backend. And the reason I switched it around is because I wanted to put the constraint on backend saying that, and you must have all of the ANSI, like, you must be usable with all of the ANSI standard SQL types. But if that constraint was trait backend where varchar native SQL type self, every time I ever wanted to say where type X is, DB is a backend, I would also have to repeat all of those constraints. And so as a result of that, I switched that trait around. And then one of the other things I would like to be able to put as a constraint on backend is that string, for example, implements to SQL and from SQL for varchar for that backend. I basically want to be able to say, if you define a backend, all of the primitives must exist. And this is mostly to aid people who are implementing other backends to make sure that they don't accidentally miss one of the common types. But I can't do it because then every time you say it's also, well, and it's also because in places where we're generic, I want to just be able to assume, like, and I can use strings and not have to respecify it there. But right now I do have to respecify it there, and we can't put it on the backend trait itself unless I flip all of these traits around and so that they're super traits of backend instead of type parameters, or instead of having backend be one of the type parameters rather. So it'd have to be like instead of string implements from SQL varchar PG, it would have to instead be like PG deserializes string varchar. Okay, I'm gonna still double check that I have like a specific compile test for that, but I'm gonna go ahead and assume that that's fine for now. I'm going to need to uncomment these. Anyway, and so I'm not willing to flip to SQL and from SQL around because I'd have to flip every other trait around as well. But it sucks I can't do that, and so that's the same thing here. I would like to be able to keep this constraint of has SQL type unqueryable, but if I do that, then I have to reference it all over the place, and sometimes that's a pain. Appears on the implement, not the corresponding trait method. Oh, right. I would have to. I have to move this onto the super trait. So this will be self parent. I do kind of wish that I could also delete this where clause since it's on the trait. Actually, can you do that? I kind of feel like you can. Sorry, my window's like slightly smaller than it should be. Belonging to. Interesting. So does it let me not specify? Does it let me not duplicate the where clause, but if I want to rely on the effects of the where clause, I still have to say it? Oh, and I need to load it. And then I'm guessing it's going to now complain that queryable's not satisfied, so I'm going to have the same where clause there anyway. No method name load type. Yeah. This is a fun trick I learned recently, where if you're getting an error that is effectively trait is not implemented, but it's coming from calling a method, so you're getting a no method error here. You can actually get a much, much nicer error message if you switch to the unambiguous calling syntax. Function UFCS, unambiguous function call syntax. So if we instead change this to underscore as load DSL, I think that takes one type parameter, right? We don't have to specify like full types or anything, but if we change this to load, and then we pass, I think that takes an ownership of self, and then connection. Right now it's going to give us the error when it tries to coerce that to load DSL. And then it'll tell us exactly why. Now we already know exactly why in this case. It's because I didn't specify child as queryable. Right, but now we're getting several things that I forgot, actually. So this is going to become child output. Let me see if I can even just say child output. I don't think I can. So in our query builder, we have a couple of different traits. The first one is called query fragment, and that's generic over the backend, and that's used to make sure that you're not using Postgres-specific features on SQLite or vice versa, and is the trait responsible for actually doing all of the SQL stuff. Query is not generic over the backend, and it has no behavior, but it does have a single type parameter called, or associated type called SQL type. And it's used for type checking. Blurg. So I need to combine all of this into like, that actually might be what I'll do. Like combine all of this into a can be queried or something. So there's actually a good reason that query ID isn't a super trait of query fragment, which is what I would intend, so that you would never have to specify both of them. Okay, so let me see what happens if I actually pull this whole where clause in here. Because we can clean this up by just moving some constraints around. I've completely lost my train of thought. I don't remember what I was just explaining. Oh, so query is used basically to mark like what the return type is, and also to indicate that something has a return type. And we actually take advantage of the difference between query fragment and as query to do some cool stuff with insert and update statements. Okay, so we're still going to need that has SQL type trait constraint. Yeah, that is the right place for it to be. So we'll need this. Ay, ay, ay. Alright, we done now? And so as query is just basically into a thing that implements query. And we use that so that I don't have to duplicate a bunch of query fragment and query impls for things like tables and all. And we used to have more intermediate structs that represented like different types of queries. Now we only have 4. That's fine. I would just need to... Oh, I need to make the trait public. Okay, so this one we can clean up significantly by making one really, really easy change in belonging to DSL. This is similar to what they do with like into iterator, where they make you re-specify the item in the into iterator trait and then just add the constraint that the iterator you return also has the same item type, specifically so that you wouldn't have to do stuff like this, which means that then I can just do child SQL type. Right, now this becomes concise enough that I'm fine. Am I fine putting that on one line? No, I'm not. Shouldn't... Oh, I'm only load, okay. Load associated. Oh, and I am going to need to change code gen now because I need to specify the SQL type in belonging to DSL. I mean, this isn't even technically correct. I don't even have to be that verbose. I can always just be child table SQL type because I know it's going to be that. In fact, I think I am going to do exactly that. Cyclic reference between traits. SQL type represents the actual type that the query returns. So it would be for a table. It's just the SQL types of each of the columns. And we keep track of it to figure out what deserialization code we actually need to run. And we do all this. We keep all this information at the type level so that we don't have to do runtime checks that something like, what you just write if you were using C directly or a library like RU SQLite or Rust Postgres has to do. That's part of what makes Diesel so much faster at deserialization than those libraries. Which is funny because there was that blog post talking about the Rust community that came out yesterday or today. I don't remember. And he was talking about how he started considering Diesel when he saw the thing about our query builder being faster than a SQL string, which I love that that's like occurring, but that's not the table name. That's the full table. The bottleneck in everything is always the deserialization code, not and the time spent transmitting data. Definitely not in the query builder. Like people have been pulling apart the benchmarks out there. Somebody just posted a link to the article in chat. Thank you for that. And people have been pulling apart the benchmarks. And if you look, right, it's microseconds. And in our benchmarks that we actually keep in the repo, we test round tripping for 0 rows, and it's visible when you round trip 0 rows. But then our other benchmarks are 10,000 rows, and it's not visible there because it's milliseconds at that point. Now, to be fair, most applications live somewhere in between, where they are most endpoints on like a web app are going to load probably somewhere between 10 and 100 rows on like an index. Not to say that people aren't loading thousands. I actually just had a conversation with some people about Active Record yesterday, and they were looking for memory usage advice on an endpoint where they are loading 1,000 rows and then sending it over the wire as JSON. But the point being there that especially when you're talking about people who aren't fans of ORMs, there's this idea that the query builder has this huge cost associated with it, which it can be non-trivial, especially in Rails. Like ARL is definitely a non-trivial cost, but that's mostly due to the fact that we create a lot of short-lived objects and add garbage collection pressure. Not because of the time it actually spends running the code. And Diesel's query builder has always been as zero cost as a query builder can be. But anyway, the faster than SQL string, right? Like, I can say all of this, but the people who were harping on it for having a query builder in the first place aren't the kind of people who are listening to me talk about why query builders are zero cost. And now we're just we're less than zero cost, and that's fine. Killer Cup, why not add benchmarks for all of those other numbers of rows? Because I just haven't yet. I don't know. Pull request welcome. All right, well, so that works. I sort of want to move some of this into like smaller traits. So it can be something like queryable belongs to, for lack of a better term. Well, that's all kind of fine. I do want to do this though. In Query Builder. You know what? I actually don't even think I want to do that. Oh, for those who are curious, the reason why I can't do this, because Query ID and Query Builder or Query Fragment basically always go together. The reason I can't just make it a super trait is because I need Query Fragment to be boxable. And like boxing this actually cuts off Query ID because I implement Query ID for Box Query Builder separately, specifically to say that no, we do not have a compile time Query ID for a boxed query fragment. I'm not, Query Builder is the wrong trait. Query Fragment is what I'm looking for. But even though like I'm cutting off all the information from Query ID when we box this, if I make Query ID a super trait, there's no way for me to say I'm just boxing the Query Fragment portion of it, so I need to keep them separate, which just means I need to reference them together in a lot of places. And it's unfortunate because it makes it easy for me to accidentally implement Query Fragment but forget to implement Query ID, which is my intention is that is to have it be a super trait, but I don't have a way to represent it in the type system. I mean, Killer Cup, you can totally just take our existing benchmarks and probably move it into a macro where and just change the number, because they'd be really simple to change the number of rows on. I don't know. This where clause is like it's bigger than I'd like, but it makes sense for it to be there. I am going to, though, since we ended up needing that has SQL type constraint anyway, I am going to go ahead and undo the change I made here where I removed that constraint, and then in here where I removed the constraint. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. If there's anything else about this that needs if there's anything I could do here to like not have to state so many of these constraints. I almost want to try making belonging to DSL generic over the back end, so that way I can put these constraints. I can put all of these constraints on. Yeah, basically all of these I could put it on belonging to DSL. Let's try that actually. And I'm actually just like moving this constraint around, right? Because I have to restate this where clause. The difference being, the difference being if I put it here, that would let me move the where clause up to the code gen crate, and like I'm more okay with scary where clauses in code gen, just because that's not like that code is going to be scary no matter what. The thing I don't like about where clauses like this in normal code is that it can scare off potential contributors to the library, because it makes everything seem more complicated than it is. Am I able to make constraints about... Like, 'cause I can't do something like where self output query, which that'd be what? as query. I can't put like a constraint like this, can I? Well, I could put this on as query, which I should do regardless. So that lets me remove this. Coxie, yeah, I mean, I can do that, and I do that in some places, and especially if I feel like it makes the name significantly more readable, I'll do that. But I don't think that will, I don't think that will lead to these traits explaining themselves more than just saying them independently, especially since the name I was thinking of would just be a combination of those names. And so I don't want to do it just to like sweep the problem under the rug. So what am I missing here? Probably that this is supposed to be as query. Well, it's filter DSL, first of all. Which ones broke? Filter DSL with DSL. And then inner and outer join source. Okay. Filter. Yes, it's probably supposed to be as query. And again, like these ones I don't feel as bad about because they're not long or complicated. Well, I mean they're long, but they're not like complicated. They're just repetitive, and that's just because select statement has a shit ton of type parameters. Because you know, lol generics. This is another like wish list item that I think I actually just need to specifically open an RFC for because the core team seems fine with it. I really want to be able to say self here, but you can't. And specifically, I want to be able to say self there and assume, and when I say self, assume that this entire where clause holds, so that way I can reference like, because right here, I'm trying to reference self SQL type, which self SQL type gets more complicated when I on a potential refactoring that or a change I want to make to these structs to deal with joining to more than one table. Coxie, thanks for. I'm gonna look at your playground link here in a few. So thank you for sending that. And sorry that it's. I guess that means what, you're in Australia. I'm trying to pick the times that like everybody can actually tune in, but there is not such a time. I have the wrong constraint. I'm trying to say where the select statement. Oh gosh. See, okay, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? I want to be able to write where self query implements query ID. But I can't. Okay, I'm gonna abort this change. Um, actually, is that all I've changed? I committed, right? Yeah, that's all I changed. All right. Change aborted. That's fine. Again, right? Like, I would totally be fine with that if I was... I really actually do need to write the RFC for this. Because seriously, I would totally have been fine with that if I could write self query ID here. I'm completely fine with that. But I wouldn't be able to do that. I would instead have to copy paste this type into the where clause, and that just makes this is already less readable than I would like. And actually, right, like even this part gets way more readable because I want this to be self SQL type. Bam, so much cleaner, but I can't do it. So it's not just that I want to be able to reference self, because that one's pretty easy. I also want to be able to assume that this where clause holds and reference the associated types, which I think will be fine. I think like there won't be much opposition to it. I just need to write the proper RFC, so that can be discussed. So many things that need RFCs. All right, so I think this is in a good place, roughly. I might still try and move. I still might try and do that change where I make belonging to DSL generic over the back end so that I can move some constraints there, but this is fine for now. Okay. I write really long commit messages, by the way, if for anybody who's not aware of that, because I get blame all the time and try to document everything going through my head. So let's go back to the insertable into case, and Let's take a look at this. So for those who weren't here earlier, where we were at was we're trying to replace the insertable into annotation with an equivalent macro that works on stable with no syntax extensions. And where we hit a wall is that we need to, in the actual body of the values function, we need to have slightly different behavior based on whether the field was an option or whether it was just a regular, or whether it was any other type. And we could not seem to get any possible token up here to be to keep option as a separate token from the inner type. Okay. For a second, I thought I had Chrome open. To keep those as separate tokens so that we can match on it here. Because right now, this is actually getting passed as the token option string as a single token. But what we actually need are the 4 independent tokens of option greater than inner type, and or less than inner type greater than. And those are 4 tokens. But because they are treated as 1 token, it's always matching the second case, which compiles, which is also unfortunate. It compiles, but it doesn't. Sorry, blanked out for a second there. It doesn't work at runtime. With unless for fields where the default is other than null, because it ends up trying to insert null. So one of the viewers who I think has now left because it is absurdly early for him, he sent over a little playground link that he thinks will allow us to do this. So let's take a look and try and figure out what he's doing and see if we'll actually be able to use it. So ooh, that is unfortunate. But maybe it's a price that we're okay with paying. So this is what he sent us, and this is like the syntax that we're trying to have passed in, so that's fine. So let's see what he's got here. Impl insertable. So it's going to have hit. Whoa. Okay, here's what we would have hit. Okay, so he's treating the body as just however many token trees. Parsing the fields, so we separate those out. And then we're hitting. Oh, yeah, that would work. Huh, okay, that totally works. Neat. Yep, cool, okay. So this needs to become, yeah, so this will be like struct name. And then why do we have curly braces there? Does it matter? I don't think it matters. Oh, to make them separate token trees. Oh, I need to use that trick more often, actually. And then I don't know why that's matching on commas. Is that just to maybe not force a trailing comma? I'm going to assume it's because we need to match 0 or more of something. Okay. I'm just gonna try and see what happens when we don't have that. So now we've got the final now we've got, so this will be what we do when we've got everything finally parsed. So this becomes, do we even need the field type then? I don't think we do here. Okay, so when we receive the original case, we do this. Oh, and we did still have @parse fields here. And then PCs aren't, the reason that that doesn't work is because we need to treat, we can't actually capture anything more specific in the original, like we can't change this, for that to work down in the per column macro that we're calling, we would have to capture them as separate tokens like that in the per struct macro that we're calling, and that would assume that either all of the fields are options or none of them are options. What we need is some sort of matcher that keeps them as separate tokens but handles both, and yours would only handle options. And once we capture it as tie in the per struct macro, we can no longer break it back apart into separate tokens. Okay, so going back, do I have my code up? I do not have my code up. I'm sorry. I did that again. I really need the. So if for those of you who follow me on Twitter, if I do that again, because I try to remember to check chat, but I don't get like notifications. Can somebody tweet at me or something that will make my phone buzz if I ever do that again? Sorry about that. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so here we're handling the option versus the non-option case. This is actually exactly what we need as written. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, and part of the reason why I'm working on this macro in the tests crate instead of inside of the diesel crate is specifically so that I don't have to recompile diesel over and over again every time we make a change. Because we don't use the diesel macros inside of diesel itself other than for tests. And actually that's not true. We use the table macro for migrations. And we will use this macro inside of diesel as well, actually. But and that's why it was compiled. I'm like, why is it that taking so long to compile? Because it's not using the options that we meant to. Grr. Again, for those of you who haven't tuned into the stream before and heard this whole spiel, the compile times aren't normally this long. The video encoder is using all of my CPU. And I'm getting, once I finish moving, which is, my furniture leaves on Friday, I'm going to get a separate dedicated piece of hardware to handle the video encoding so that the compile times are back down to their normal 15 or so seconds, which is still long, but is much better than the like full minute that it is when I'm streaming. Plus, it's like if I ever, because the Rust compiler to get to stage 1 takes 7 minutes on my machine, and so if I ever want to stream working on the Rust compiler, that'll take like 30 minutes while I'm streaming. Okay, I've done something different than what he was handling here. Am I forgetting the entry case? No. Is it just I don't have that trailing comma? Expected ident found at. Is it because this needs to be at the bottom? If so, that is extremely annoying and should be fixed. That does change it. Expected item found comma. Better. Now, we can actually we can make this slightly better now. So we can do like match this field name as ref. I'm going to change, yeah, I'm going to change this. Instead of passing this in, I'm going to change this to be like field access. So then this becomes that, because oh, and then table name needs to become column. And expr maybe doesn't work there. I think that might need to be path. I'm doing all this just so I can pass this in as the expression and continue to reuse this code, which maybe I am now in the realm of overkill. And you know what I'm gonna do? Well, okay. You know what? Let's see if that works. And if not, I'll back out a little bit. And the reason we're having to make this change is because with the code as Quxy wrote it, Quxy, however the hell you pronounce that, the type now that we're referencing for the column does not include the option. Which is fine and actually better reflects the behavior. Oh, it's compiling. Haha, success. I am going to move all of this into a separate macro, though, called, like, impl insertable body. Just because of the way, like, I'm going to remember to close Chrome this time. I'm definitely going to remember to close Chrome this time. Or to switch back. If you look at the way that macros are documented, like, it actually just shows you the... Oh, wait, no, it doesn't. It used to show you the entire macro body here, and I guess that changed. Even better. Though still, I would prefer that the rules that get documented be, like, just the struct definition and not the at parse fields stuff that we're doing. So yeah, I remember it this time. Really need to get used to that. Or just have a second screen so it's, like, always up. That is because I have this, and is not actually a problem. Well, I really need to double check that that isn't a thing. I don't think I've done a release with that commit yet. because I changed it in. Yeah, I have not done a release with this commit yet. Just on master. So I need to like triple check this before I actually release. I don't know why I'm doing this again. The test passed. Okay. So if we've done this right, then we should be able to replace this. And if that one works, we still need to handle lifetimes. So I will handle a thing with lifetimes, and then once we are handling lifetimes, we're going to take this and move it into diesel proper, and then we're gonna change all of what CodeGen is doing to actually just call this macro for you. Which I still think like CodeGen will have a reason to exist, because right now this macro involves copy pasting your struct definition. But maybe we will eventually have a thing for this that I feel like CodeGen doesn't need to exist. Not sure. I also need to look at somebody posted a custom derived stable thing that I need to look at, and maybe we can use, but I'm not going to do that right now because I kind of want to finish up by lunchtime. Okay, so that still works. So now let's go. We'll need to like. Maybe this will be fine. In our insert test, I believe is where. Yeah, here we go. So this is where like. I'm not even sure that we can do this, but somebody had pointed it out, and maybe we can. So this now needs to become, so if we do impl insertable here, right? This is going to end up giving us macro undefined, I'm almost positive, and I'll just need to reorder my modules, which I'm just going to do before I forget. Schema needs to come at the top, and we'll probably need to do like, we'll see if we need to annotate with macro use or something. We might not. So we delete this into users. Right, and it's going to fail with macro undefined. Okay, so now it's failing because it expected lifetimes, or it didn't expect the angle brackets. Now we're only going to need to handle lifetimes here because why do we only need to handle lifetimes? We only need to handle lifetimes because insertable into does not support generics. And it might in the future, but for now we only need to support generics. So let's see first if we can, this is the big question, is if I can even just, without a lifetime specifier here, if I can do something like this. Actually, I think if I write it exactly like that, well, but it's not, it's joined with commas. I just want to see if I can get that to match. It does. Okay. So this is going to need to be like this. And this one will be similar. But we'll actually put the lifetimes in there. And then in this final case, so struct name is going to become a tie, which also actually means down here, this is going to still include the lifetimes. And then what we'll need to do is put the lifetimes here. Like that. Might help if I am invoking the right thing. And I'm going to reformat all of this because this is just way too many like random strings of characters on one line. And sorry that my webcam is there again. Actually, I'm just going to move it to the left. We don't need that test open. Sorry, I also need to have a second monitor so that, like, I can see chat sooner. Expected identifier found. Can I not use... Welp. I need to revise my RFC because I actually just amended it to mention that the whole reason I was doing this is somebody was like, actually, your RFC doesn't add additional capabilities because you can just match against token tree. And that should work. But that's not the case. So I'm going to go comment on this RFC. Oops, not Rust, RFCs. Anyway, yeah, so this is, um, I guess, where this feature will end, because it is impossible without a change to the Rust compiler. And that is how I got here in the first place. I was not planning on working on this more today, because I had explored it a little bit and had come to the conclusion that it was impossible without the ability to add a lifetime without the ability to match against a lifetime specifier in the sorry. To answer the question here, Riaswar, no, single quote A is not a valid identifier, which is why it's giving that error message in the first place. You can totally use a TT in place of an identifier, and that works fine, but this is not a valid identifier. And even if we were able to do that and lie and say it was an ident, like, due to the way the parser works, right? This doesn't emit code that gets reparsed. It will still see that as a ident token, even if we were to manage to get to accept single quote A as an ident token. It would always see that as an ident token that will never change to get reparsed. So it will think that that is a type parameter called single quote A, and not treat it as a lifetime. Anyway, so yeah, I had come to the conclusion when I was working on this a little bit, or when I was exploring this a little bit yesterday, that it was impossible without the ability to match against a lifetime specifier. Now, if you want, actually, we can you know what, we can continue this, because as it just so happens, I have a I happen to have a version of the Rust compiler installed that adds a lifetime specifier. Haha. So that works. Hopefully, this might actually just show a place that this is problematic. But yeah, so if we do multi-rust run local. Let's see if it works when I'm able to match against a lifetime. Anyway, so yeah, so yesterday I had written a patch for the Rust compiler to support lifetimes in macros, and there was an open issue on the Rust Lang repo, so I'd assumed that it was an accepted feature at that point, but the Nico commented on it, this should have an RFC, but it can be a really, really brief one, and we'll fast track it. So now I've got the RFC up. And somebody this morning commented, when I was saying there is no way to do this without this change, he commented, actually, you can just match against token tree. But that clearly is not the case. I'm actually kind of curious why that isn't the case. And yeah, this is going to take a minute to compile because it's now using a different version of the Rust compiler, so it's recompiling all of the things, and I probably didn't compile with all of the right flags to make everything super fast. Again, sorry about the changing lighting. All of this will be better once I move and can have a place to stream from that does not have the only source of light in the room be directly behind me. Expected oh, that's easy. So that's because this is expanding in the case where we passed only the lifetime A, because of how I've written this. This expands to basically, there's not a comma after the last one. Hold on. If I can type, it's expanding to this, and that's not valid. So we just need to do that, which says always have a comma after it. Yes. So this was the thing I was mentioning earlier, where we can't use this, and this is a bug in the Rust compiler that the core team is aware of, but is very hard for them to do anything about because I've not managed to isolate it like easily outside of Diesel. So quite literally, when we inline the result of this helper type, so this becomes Diesel expression bound. And then the first type parameter to bound is the SQL type, so that becomes this as Diesel expression SQL type, and then the second parameter is still the same thing. If we do this, it will compile, and that is quite literally what the type parameter is, and I have a feeling it has something to do with because since it's specifically talking about, I also love the error message it gives there, where it says, consider using an explicit lifetime parameter as shown, and then it doesn't show using a lifetime parameter. And so I'm guessing it has to do with somehow, with how this gets inlined or something. But I just pointed at my screen, and you can't see me pointing at my screen. With how this associated type gets inlined as the return type of this function, I have a feeling the way that the compiler handles that is the source of it. And if it's ever gonna get fixed, I'm probably just gonna have to go try and do it myself because I'm basically the only one who can reproduce it easily. And I've been trying to get more involved in the compiler anyway, so hey, it compiled. Let's see if the test pass. Well, technically it could still fail to compile, but when it gets to this point, it's pretty much compiled. Yeah, so this works fine if we are able to specify lifetime, but unfortunately this is not something that you can download a version of Rust that does that. Yes, I am very familiar with the first world presentation problems from speaking at all of the conferences. Which is funny, like this feels kind of similar to speaking at a conference, but like not really because I can't get an immediate reaction to anything that I say. So it's, it's like when I make a joke, I don't get to hear people laughing, although that's okay because when I'm on stage and I tell a joke, nobody laughs then either. So it's actually exactly the same. I can feel the virtual groaning there. Dad jokes. Okay, so this totally works with the change to the Rust compiler. So what we should be able to, in theory, do now is I should be able to take this code, move it into Diesel macros, I will probably just move this into this same macro and doc hide it, just because macros exist in a global namespace and I don't like to pollute it if I can avoid it. But it's fine because I'm trying to get close to wrapping up. So we do that, and then we should be able to go back here. And I don't think I made any changes other than that adding impl insertable. Yeah. Whoops. And then what I want to do instead, and then in the insert test, same thing. So I want to leave those annotations. I want to, in the macro, place all uses of Diesel with $crate. So that way you can rename diesel. And then in CodeGen, what we should be able to do is like delete all of this. That's not going to need to be mutable. I'll still keep that so you get the right error. And this should be able to change to like quote item impl, or not impl, tie into table mod. Oh, I guess we need the body, don't we? So this would be like fields iter what would this be? This would be quote tokens, field name, field tie. That's it, actually. And then I don't think I support annotate. Like, one of the things I need to do with this is actually change it so it supports tuple structs, and also so that it supports. And with tuple structs, you would annotate the fields with the column name. I think we did that for change set, but I don't think I ever remembered to do it here, which is why. So if you look at adder, column name is always a thing that is there, and then field name is optional because it might come from an annotation. Why is that optional? I don't think it is optional, actually. Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll do that. Because I don't think I support tuple structs here anyway. That needs a trailing comma. Right, so now this code is just calling that macro for you, and I can delete all of that. Tim and M1, can you use an item in that position where the lifetime's being used? It doesn't seem like it should. Although you have code that shows that yes, you can, so. Oh, I see, right. You're just taking the whole thing. That is such a hack. I mean, I do the same thing for expressions when I'm doing tuple field access in macros, but it's annoying. Guess I'm not unwrapping that. And unused imports. I always love that when like I delete all of the code and then it's complaining about the unused imports. This code needs to be refactored anyway. This is one of the first I think this is the first module I added for CodeGen. What I mean by saying it's stupid isn't that the code itself is stupid. I mean that the fact that you have to do that is stupid. And that the compiler should be able to handle it. Well, We managed to not actually implement insertable for anything. What happens if I do this? Because this should be unwrapping. Oh. Actually, I should be unwrapping this so that this blows up loudly if it fails to parse. It's failing to parse because we're not invoking the macro. I actually should just have this be returning a result instead of an option. I am going to make that change. Just so I can semantically differ between because it's like, I'm unwrapping here. I'm fine with unwrapping here because while technically right, this is an error case. If this is failing to parse, that is because of a programmer error in the compiler. So it should panic. Or a programmer error in the CodeGen plugin. Yeah, so it should panic because it's a bug in the compiler plugin that needs to be addressed by me, not silently ignore my error. Although Rust.C will report that as a bug in Rust. So close. Expected item found new user. Huh. That's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. Do that. Wow, so clutch. Yeah, when you're dealing with these sorts of code gen things, it's kind of like a weird closure. But basically you only ever need to write stuff like this if you're making something like Diesel. But yeah, I mean, you could call anything that manipulates ASTs a weird closure. No rules expected the token. Oh gosh. See now, I need to break. I need to break the friggin' struct names apart. Okay, how do I get this from the generics? Generics. No, it's syntax, AST, generics, lifetimes. Okay. Back lifetime doesn't work. Lifetime def, I need you to be an ident or a name. That's literally just because the way that we've ironically this will work fine on syntax because syntax doesn't emit tokens to the Rust compiler, but we are emitting tokens to the Rust compiler. And so we just need to make sure that the lifetimes are actually individual tokens and not part of the general struct type. Well, that's... Oh, come on. I know you deref to a regular string, and I know a regular string implements 2 tokens. Or do I need to turn that into an ident? Oh, this isn't a file. This is the Rust compiler. So, like, if I accidentally change a character there, it's not going to affect anything because we're not recompiling the Rust compiler. Expected a lifetime name. That's helpful. Do I need to put a comma here at the end? I'll clean this up once I've figured out how to get it working. Is there seriously not a way? Like, can I not just... That seriously not implement 2 tokens? Tim NN1, yes, I could, but I need the angle brackets to be a different token. Like that's what I originally had here. Oh, I see what yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think that does work. Is that what you mean? You're right. I think that does work. Yes, I know I'm losing the lifetime bounds, and that's kind of sort of intentional. There is no way for me in a regular macro to lose the lifetime bounds, or to not lose the lifetime bounds. The lifetime bounds around this stuff, though, are also rather broken at the moment. Yeah, see, there's the problem. The angle brackets end up being 1 token. So I need to actually separate out the angle brackets. But yes, the long-term goal is to provide macro specifiers that roughly map to lifetime def, tie param, and where clause, and then also something that maps to generics, and give the appropriate pieces to manipulate those, although that can probably be a different crate. So that way we could do this without losing the bounds. Yeah, 2 tokens isn't implement on lifetime, so it needs to be ist ident with empty context. How? Oh, right, because it's not... of course. It's not a... It's not an ident. It's a lifetime. Where does 2 tokens come from? Ah. I feel like this is just missing... I feel like this is just missing 2 tokens impl for lifetime. Yes, it is, and I need to amend this. I'm just going to assume that this works the same as the other non-terminals. So let's go ahead and I'm just making sure that I don't have any other changes. That wasn't just me debugging something unrelated, and we don't. So let's go ahead and do a make. Is it just stage 1? I don't want to go all the way to stage 2 because we'll be here all day. I know that'll depend on the thing that actually builds stage 1. Let's see if this actually finishes in a semi-reasonable amount of time, because that's going to compile everything and take forever. While that runs, actually, I'm curious now. Because the impl for vec doesn't, like, separate it with a comma, right? No. Yeah, so we would still need to do that to get the comma in there, but that's kind of fine. Anyways, let's see. Up, messed something up. Found struct. Expected pointer. Oops, wrong thing. All right. Well, let's see if that compiles. If it does, I'll give it like 10 minutes so that we can see if this works before I end the stream. And then I'm going to go get lunch because it is now noon here, and we've been going for 3 hours. But while we wait for that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the nonsense that we've done today, Diesel in general, Rust in general, Rails, YAF, which is the name for the web framework that I've spoken about a little bit that I'm working on. Any questions about any of those or anything else? Wait, why would I be taking... No, okay, I see what I'm doing wrong here. Am I going to be in a pointer here? No, I wouldn't. So I just do that. By the way, if you are using Diesel for anything, even if it's just a little side project, I'd love to hear about it. And specifically, I would love to hear about your experiences and anything that you think is missing. I announced yesterday that I believe 0.7 will be the last release before 1.0. So the rough plan there is, so we get 0.7 out the door. And then I'll have all of the features that are especially worrying to me in terms of needing breaking changes. And then I'm just going to let it sit for a while. Specifically, I'm going to finish porting crates.io over to using Diesel. Because that is a decent-sized app. That'll take a couple of weeks for me to do. And it's a decent-sized app that has been poking Diesel's API every which way, and that's been really helpful for API feedback. So I want to feel confident that we're sort of there on things like associations. And at that point, if everything's still good, I'll do a release candidate, and then we'll ship RC1 or 1.0. That doesn't mean Diesel's finished by a long shot, but what it does mean is that I'm confident that the remaining features that aren't there won't require breaking changes, and or are something I'm comfortable pushing to 2.0. What I'm getting at with all of that is that there's a decent number of features that are like just not quite there yet or implemented, but I haven't slated for 1.0 because they are not things I anticipate requiring breaking changes to the API. That said, if you specifically need something and you're looking to use Diesel, open an issue or comment on the tracking issue if there is one, or just ping me in Gitter, because we are still at the point where, like, depending on how complex of a feature it is, right, I can really prioritize what people who are actually using Diesel right now actually need. Even though I'm planning on getting all of it out eventually, but that's going, it'll be another couple months before the backlog on the issue tracker is really fully eliminated. Things like Upsert, which added support for one specific type of upsert specifically on SQL 8 because somebody needed it. And even though I've always been planning on adding it. Anyway, so if you are using Diesel and there's something like that, like the 99% cases are all there at this point. I'm pretty confident in that. So the web framework and planning, it's not even in planning, like it's actively being worked on. But I'm not putting anything up yet because I'm still figuring out the core API. And it's called Yoff because before Diesel was named Diesel, it was called YAQB, which was short for yet another query builder. So Yoff is the working name. I'm very consistent on the working name. Once it is up, and I'll be tweeting about it nonstop once it's up, but it'll be at sgrif/Yoff. Maybe I'll make a Yoff-RS org. I will definitely need to remember to move it to an org though before the 0.1 release of it, because it was a little bit more painful to do that for Diesel than I'd expected it to be. But yeah, where it's at right now is basically like, so I don't know if you're familiar with Rails API, the Rails API at all, but in our router we have a method called resources, which assumes the seven CRUD routes, new and edit, to give you a form for new and a form for edit, create and update, which are the post and put equivalents of those, index, show, destroy. And so those are meant to map one-to-one with an HTTP resource, which in Rails is usually assumed to be one-to-one with the database row. So the API for Yoff is kind of sort of at, like, what if we only had that? Didn't assume that an HTTP resource was one-to-one with the database row, but still made that case very easy. Focused on composition there, and then also strictly separated fetching of resources from rendering them. Yes, I will be streaming working on Yoff when I'm like more fully working on it. My motivation for doing the web framework, yeah, so there's a place for iron. Like iron is very much akin to Sinatra. Now there are still some issues with Iron's API that hinder it for me, but those are all like addressable. But I think there's a place for a more opinionated framework that's more focused on building applications. And that's sort of what I'm going for. My motivation for doing it is that Rust is a language that I'm very excited about. And it's very much pegged into this low-level performance niche. And it's good there, don't get me wrong. But like the two languages that Rust is sort of most similar to are C/C++ and Haskell. And it's the type system that really excites me, and I think that that Rust is going to be a pleasant language to use for higher level use cases. And for me, that generally means web development. And so I'm trying to prove that Rust is pleasant to use for high level types of programming, and then B, I'm trying to grow the user base by somewhat, to a certain extent, doing for Rust what Rails did for Ruby. I am not at the moment building on one of the lower level HTTP APIs because the actual interface, like the actual implementation details of Yoff are relatively unimportant to me right now, and I'm still just focusing on the API. Um, but yes, it likely will be built on something that's already out there because I do not want to maintain an HTTP parser. Yeah, I've looked a little bit at GraphQL. I don't really, I don't have a ton to say about it other than like, yeah, it's there, it's cool, it's a thing. I feel like it's sort of tangential to where we're going with Diesel. Is there actually a Rust client for it? Somebody asked on Reddit, here's a question for the stream. This was 2 hours ago, so Johnny Bob, I apologize if you are no longer watching, but I will probably reply mentioning the time that I answered this. Would it be possible to generate a general purpose compiler plugins for self-struct inspection, field default values, tagging struct fields, subsequently using those as a starting point to build something like Diesel? Yes, I think it is possible to build a general purpose compiler plugin for inspecting structs, and I think that custom derive should be much easier than it is. It sounds like there's already actually something out there that I'm going to look at this afternoon. No, that would not be a great starting point for building something like Diesel, because the code gen aspect of Diesel is just removing a very small amount of boilerplate, but at the end of the day, like you could implement. I mean, we do it in Diesel itself. If you look at like migration data, because we use Diesel, for example, interfacing with schema migrations, and like we just implement insertable ourselves, and it's kind of fine. Like this is what CodeGen saves you. I don't want to have to write this for every single struct, which is why CodeGen exists, but you can, and it's not that bad. It is worse on structs that have more than one field, though. Mostly just the type signature here, which again, this wouldn't even need to be as ugly if I could just do like lifetime of self. Anyway, if you are in chat, let me know, and I'm happy to. But hopefully that answers your question. All right, this is not going to finish anytime soon. This is like not even halfway done, I think. Unfortunately, while it normally takes 7 minutes on my machine, the video encoding is taking up too much processing time. I'm relatively certain that will be the end of it, the end of the changes needed in the Rust compiler to make this work for that macro. So what I'll probably do is even though I can't merge it until this change goes out in Rust itself, I can probably enable it for nightly as soon as it's in nightly, but it will probably be at least 3 months before it's in stable. Because I would imagine if the RFC gets super fast tracked, right, and so it gets accepted right away, and then the actual implementation is immediately merged. I would imagine it'll be feature gated and wouldn't even be a candidate for stabilization until the version after the current one, which I don't know what number we're tracking right now, but I guess I can find out, can't I? Yeah, so I would imagine it won't even be a candidate for stabilization until 1.11. So then another 18 weeks after that for 1.11 to be a released stable version. But I will still open the pull request so that the file code can be seen and so that the rest of the Diesel core team can do code review on it. I'm going to just clean up the macro structure a little bit after lunch and test it against this change. I'll amend my pull request I don't remember. Oh, I'll make my pull request on the Rust compiler to implement 2 tokens for the non-terminal, which I should have done in the first place when I introduced a non-terminal lifetime. Yeah, we're still just at borrow check. This is not going to finish compiling in a reasonable amount of time. So, sorry. I would love to have shown it finishing and then like it's working, but we're not going to get there. So, thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm going to be streaming again tomorrow at the same time. So that's 9 a.m. Mountain Time, 3 p.m. UTC. Hopefully, you'll tune in. I'll be tweeting out the link to the PR when that's up, and I'll tweet out a link to the VOD on YouTube when that's up. If you're not following me on Twitter, I'm at SGRIF. Please let me know if you have any feedback for the stream, anything you enjoyed or that I can improve on. I'd love to hear about it. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot, guys. I'm pausing for a minute to make sure that the video buffers because I stopped mid-sentence last time. Thanks, Killer Cup. I will review that as soon as I'm done eating.